The woman was standing at my door when I came home from the grocery store. Mid-60s, gray hair tied back, wearing a windbreaker despite the mild afternoon. She had a folder tucked under her arm and an expression I couldn't read. Nervous, maybe, or determined. "Are you Diane Merrick?" she asked. I set the bags down on the porch. "Yes." "My name is Carol Hendricks. I'm a genealogist. I've been researching family records for the Merrick family line, and I came across something I think you should know about." I didn't recognize her. Didn't recognize the name. "I'm sorry, I'm not interested in genealogy services." "This isn't about services." She shifted the folder. "It's about your brother, Michael Merrick." I went still. She continued, softer now. "I know this is going to sound strange, but I have reason to believe Michael didn't die in 1984. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I picked up my groceries and unlocked the door. "You need to leave. Ems Merrick, please. Just 5 minutes." I wouldn't have come here if I didn't think this was real. I turned back. My brother died when he was 8 years old. There's a grave. There's a death certificate. There was a funeral. I was there. I know, I've seen the records. But there are inconsistencies. Things that don't add up. She held out the folder. "Please. Just look at this." I should have closed the door. I should have told her to go. But something about the way she said it, "things that don't add up," made me pause. I took the folder. "Thank you," she said. "I'll leave you my number. If you have questions, call me." She handed me a business card, then walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, then went inside and set the groceries on the counter. I didn't open the folder right away. I made coffee. I put away the groceries. I stood in my kitchen and tried to convince myself this was nothing. Then I opened it. Inside were photocopies, census records, birth certificates, newspaper clippings, and a letter handwritten addressed to Carol Hendricks. The letter was from a man named Michael Merrick. It was dated 6 months ago. I sat down at the table and read it. The letter was brief, careful. Michael, or whoever was writing, explained that he'd been researching his own family history and had found records suggesting he'd had a sister named Diane. He said he'd been adopted as a child and had spent years trying to piece together where he'd come from. He'd hired Carol to help him find answers. He included a birth date, March 12, 1976, my brother's birth date. I read the letter 3 times. Then I looked at the other documents. There was a birth certificate for Michael James Merrick, born in Fresno, California. Parents listed as Robert and Linda Merrick. My parents. There was a newspaper clipping from 1984, a short obituary. Michael Merrick, age 8, died after a brief illness, survived by his parents and sister Diane. And then there was another document. An adoption record dated October 1984. A boy, age 8, placed with a family in Oregon. Name changed to Michael Brennan. I set the papers down and stared at them. Michael had died in August of 1984. I remembered it. I'd been 12. He'd been sick for weeks. Pneumonia, the doctors said. He'd been in the hospital, then he'd come home, and then one morning my mother came into my room and told me he was gone. I remembered the funeral. Small, quiet. The casket had been closed. My mother said it was better that way, that I should remember him how he'd been before he got sick. I remembered the grave. We'd visited it every year on his birthday until my parents died. It was still there, in the cemetery on the east side of town, under a tree. I'd been there 2 months ago. But if these documents were real, then someone had been adopted in October of that year. 2 months after Michael died, I called Carol Hendricks. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Merrick. The adoption record. Where did you get it?" "County Archives in Multnomah County, Oregon." "It's sealed, but I was able to access it through a legal request on behalf of my client." "Your client?" "The man who wrote the letter." "Yes." "You believe him?" "I believe the records are real. Whether he's actually your brother, I can't say for certain. But the timelines match, the details match, and he has no reason to lie. He's not asking for money or property. He just wants to know where he came from." I could be a scammer. Hay could be. But I've been doing this work for 30 years, Ms. Merrick. I've seen a lot of scams. This doesn't feel like one. I was quiet. "I know this is overwhelming," she said. "But if you're willing, I can arrange a meeting. Or a phone call. Whatever you're comfortable with. I need to think. Of course. Take your time. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, holding the folder, trying to process what I'd just read. If Michael was alive, that meant everything I'd been told was a lie. It meant my parents had lied. It meant there was someone in a grave that wasn't my brother. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the funeral, the casket, the grave. I thought about my mother's face when she'd told me Michael was gone. She'd been calm, composed. She'd held my hand and said it was going to be okay. I thought about my father, standing silent at the graveside, staring down at the casket. I thought about the years after, visiting the grave, leaving flowers, talking to a headstone like my brother could hear me. If he'd been alive that whole time, where had he been? And why had my parents told me he was dead? The next morning, I called the cemetery. I asked to speak to someone about grave records. They transferred me to an administrator named Phyllis. I need to verify something, I said. There's a grave in your cemetery. Michael Merrick, died 1984. I'm his sister. I need to know if there's actually a burial there. Phyllis was quiet for a moment. That's an unusual request. I understand, but I have reason to believe the records might be incomplete. Can you come in? I'll need to see identification and verify your relationship. Then we can pull the records. I went that afternoon. Phyllis was an older woman, efficient and no nonsense. She reviewed my ID, confirmed my relationship, then went into a back office and returned with a file. The plot was purchased in 1984 by Robert Merrick, she said. The burial took place on August 26th of that year. Death certificate was filed with the county. Is there any way to verify that someone is actually buried there? She looked at me carefully. Are you asking about exhumation? I don't know. Maybe. That requires a court order. You'd need to petition the county. Provide evidence of why you believe the burial is in question. It's not a simple process. But it's possible. Yes. If you have grounds. I took the file and made copies of everything. Then I went home and called Carol Hendricks again. I want to meet him, I said. She arranged it for the following week. A coffee shop in Portland, neutral territory. She'd be there too, she said, to mediate if needed. I drove up on a Saturday morning. The coffee shop was small, tucked into a quiet neighborhood. I arrived early, ordered tea I didn't drink, and sat by the window. Carol arrived first. She waved, sat down across from me. He'll be here in a few minutes. Are you ready? No. She smiled faintly. That's understandable. The door opened, and a man walked in. Late 40s, tall, dark hair graying at the temples. He wore glasses and a jacket, and he moved carefully, like he wasn't sure he belonged here. Carol stood and waved him over. He walked to our table and stopped looking at me. I looked back. I didn't see my brother. I saw a stranger. But then he smiled, hesitant and uncertain, and something in his face, something in the shape of his eyes, the way his mouth curved, looked familiar. Diane, he said. I nodded. He sat down. His hands were shaking. Thank you for coming. I know this is hard to believe. Tell me what you remember, I said. He took a breath. I don't remember much. I was 8 when it happened. I remember being sick. I remember the hospital. Then I remember being in a car, going somewhere. There were people I didn't know. They told me I was going to live with them now, that they were my new family. Who were they? The Brennans. They lived in Oregon. They adopted me, changed my name. They told me my parents had died, that I didn't have any other family. And you believed them? I was 8. I didn't have a choice. I studied his face. Why now? Why look for your real family now? Because I found something a few years ago. After my adoptive mother died, I was going through her things. I found documents, letters between her and my biological parents. They were negotiating. My parents paid the Brennans to take me. Paid them? Yes, I don't know why. But there were bank records, letters, everything. That's when I realized I'd been lied to. So I started looking. I hired Carol. And eventually we found you. I sat back. My parents told me you died. There was a funeral. There's a grave. I know. Carol showed me the records. I don't understand it either. But I'm here. I'm alive. Carol cleared her throat gently. I think the next step is a DNA test. That would confirm whether you're related. I looked at Michael. or whoever he was. Fine. We went to a clinic that afternoon. They took samples from both of us. The results would take a week. I drove home in silence. Over the next week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through old family photos, looking for anything that might help me understand. I found pictures of Michael as a baby, as a toddler. I found pictures of him and me together, at the park, at Christmas, at his birthday party. I found a picture of him in the hospital near the end. He looked small, pale, exhausted. I found nothing that explained why my parents would have given him away. The DNA results came back positive, 99.7% probability that Michael Brennan was my biological brother. Carol called to tell me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this complicates things." "It doesn't complicate things, it answers them." I hung up and sat on my couch, staring at the wall. My brother was alive. My parents had given him away and told me he was dead. I needed to know why. I started with the hospital. Michael had been treated at Valley Children's Hospital in 1984. I called their records department and requested his medical file. They told me it would take time. Patient records from that era were archived, stored off-site. It might take weeks to retrieve them. I said I'd wait. While I waited, I went to the courthouse and filed a petition for exhumation. I explained the situation: DNA test, adoption records, the possibility that the grave was empty or contained someone else. The clerk looked at me like I was insane, but she processed the paperwork. A judge reviewed it 2 weeks later. She called me into her chambers. Judge Marianne Stokes was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and direct. "Ms. Merrick, this is an extraordinary request. Exhumations are rare and require substantial evidence. What you're alleging is serious." "I know. If you're wrong, you'll be desecrating a grave. If you're right, we're talking about potential fraud, possibly more. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes." She studied me for a long moment. Then she signed the order. The exhumation was scheduled for early November. I was allowed to be present, along with a coroner, a forensic team, and a county representative. I stood at a distance while they worked, watching them dig. It took hours. When they finally opened the casket, the coroner leaned in, examined the contents, then stepped back and motioned to the county representative. They conferred quietly. Then the coroner walked over to me. "Ms. Merrick, the casket is empty. There's no body." I didn't react. I just nodded. The coroner continued. "We'll need to file a report. This will trigger an investigation. Do you understand?" "Yes." The county opened a fraud investigation the following week. Detectives interviewed me, Michael Carroll. They reviewed the adoption records, the hospital files, the cemetery paperwork. The hospital finally sent Michael's medical records. I read them in the detective's office. Michael had been sick in the summer of 1984, but not with pneumonia. According to the records, he'd been diagnosed with a severe behavioral disorder. The notes described violent outbursts, inability to connect with others, recommendations for long-term psychiatric care. There was a note from my father dated August 1984. He'd declined inpatient treatment. He'd signed Michael out of the hospital against medical advice. 2 weeks later, Michael had been placed with the Brennans in Oregon. The detective, a man named Raymond Torres, set the file down. "Your parents didn't want him anymore, so they paid someone to take him, and then they faked his death." "Yes. They filed a false death certificate, held a fake funeral, bought a grave plot. They wanted everyone to believe he was gone. Why? I don't know. Shame, maybe. Fear. People didn't talk about mental illness the same way back then. Maybe they thought it was easier to say he died than to explain what was really happening." I sat there, absorbing it. "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll continue the investigation. Your parents are deceased, so we can't charge them. But we can close the case officially, correct the records. Michael's legal identity will be restored. The grave will be removed. It's a mess, but we'll sort it out." I thanked him and left. I met Michael for coffee a few days later. He looked tired, older than he had when we'd first met. "I talked to the detective," he said. "He told me what was in the hospital records." I nodded. "I don't remember being violent, but I was 8. Maybe I was. Maybe I was too much for them. That's not an excuse. I know. But it's an explanation." We sat in silence for a while. "What do you want to do now?" I asked. He shrugged. I don't know. I've spent 40 years not knowing who I was. Now I know, and it doesn't make me feel better. No, it doesn't. Do you want to stay in touch? I thought about it. I don't know yet. He nodded. That's fair. We finished our coffee and parted ways. Over the next few months, I tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. The county issued a corrected death certificate, or rather voided the false one. Michael's legal name was restored. The grave was removed. The plot returned to the cemetery. I didn't visit the cemetery anymore. There was nothing there. Michael and I exchanged emails occasionally. Short, careful messages. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't talk about our parents. We just existed in each other's lives, tentatively, like two people learning a language neither of us spoke fluently. It wasn't closure. It wasn't healing. It was just acknowledgement. I thought about my parents sometimes. Wondered what they'd been thinking. Wondered if they'd regretted it. Wondered if they'd thought about Michael, wherever he was, and felt anything at all. I'd never know. But I knew this: they'd made a choice. They'd chosen to erase him, and they'd lived with that choice for the rest of their lives. I didn't have to. I had a brother. He was alive, and maybe that was enough. If you've ever discovered that the people who shaped your understanding of the world built it on a lie, and had to decide whether to keep their version or write your own, you're not alone. Some truths take decades to surface, but when they do, you get to choose what to do with them.